What if I told you that the moment FBI agents stepped into Ozzy Osbourne's mansion after his death, they weren't just walking into the home of a rock legend. They were walking into a labyrinth of secrets, a place where the walls themselves seemed to whisper of rituals, betrayals, and hidden truths that even his most loyal fans couldn't imagine. Sounds insane, right? But then again, so was Ozzy. And now, after years of speculation about his so-called Prince of Darkness persona, the reality turned out to be even more disturbing than the myth. Think about this for a second. We've all laughed, been shocked, or even rolled our eyes at Ozzy's antics, biting the head off a bat on stage, mumbling incoherently on his reality show, surviving decades of chaos fueled by fame, fortune, and addiction. But underneath that eccentric, unpredictable public mask, what was really going on? Was it all just performance art? Or was there truly something darker running through his veins, something he carried with him right to the grave? But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. That's the question investigators faced the moment the locks were broken, the rooms secured, and the search began. It wasn't just about cataloging personal effects. No, this was about uncovering whether the world had been deceived for decades. And the more the agents looked, the stranger it got. Now pause here, because I want you to imagine walking into the home of someone you thought you knew. You expect to see the usual clothes, photos, maybe a few eccentric decorations if we're talking about a rock star like Ozzy. But what if, instead, you stumble into hidden chambers sealed from public view? What if, instead of platinum records on the wall, you find bizarre relics straight out of a nightmare? Would you keep looking, or would you turn back? For the FBI, turning back wasn't an option. This story matters now more than ever, not just because it involves a cultural icon, but because it blurs the line between performance and reality, between legend and truth. For decades, Ozzy cultivated the image of a man living on the edge, dangerous, wild, unpredictable. But what if that wasn't just an act? What if the things people whispered about him, the occult references in his lyrics, the rumors of rituals, the scandals behind his marriage, were rooted in something far more tangible than anyone wanted to believe? And here's the twist. What they uncovered inside his mansion didn't just paint a picture of a man obsessed with darkness. It exposed cracks in his family, secret communications with Hollywood elites, and items so bizarre that even hardened investigators were left speechless. Let's rewind for a moment. Ozzy Osbourne wasn't just a rock star. He was a cultural phenomenon. From the early days with Black Sabbath, when critics labeled him the face of satanic panic, to his bizarre antics in the 2000s on reality TV, his persona was always larger than life. Parents warned their kids about him. Religious groups denounced him. Fans idolized him. And through it all, Ozzy played his part perfectly, the Prince of Darkness, smiling through the chaos, acting like he didn't care what anyone thought. But here's the thing. Behind every act, there's a man. Behind every myth, there's a truth. And that's where the story gets chilling. Because the FBI wasn't just cataloging collectibles. They were unearthing a hidden life. A side of Ozzy that blurred the line between theatrical and terrifying. A side that might explain not only his strange obsessions, but also the fractures in his family and the powerful secrets he carried to his grave. Now let me ask you, do you think Ozzy wanted this side of himself revealed? Or do you believe he went to extraordinary lengths to hide it, only for death to finally pull back the curtain? As investigators opened door after door, they weren't just dealing with memorabilia and music awards. They were facing whispers of rituals, relics tied to centuries-old traditions, and journals filled with confessions that read like a script too outrageous for even Hollywood. Imagine reading the private thoughts of a man who laughed at the world on camera but cried into his pages at night. Imagine listening to tapes that revealed truths so painful that his family may never recover. And yet, the artifacts themselves, the physical evidence, stood as undeniable proof that Ozzy's life was far more complicated than anyone ever imagined. Think about the irony for a moment. Here was a man who made a career out of shocking people, out of pushing boundaries so far that society itself recoiled. And still, in death, he managed to shock us again, not through a staged act on a stage, not through a publicity stunt, but through the raw, undeniable truth left behind in his own home. This is why the story resonates now, because it forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew, not just about Ozzy, but about fame itself, about the cost of building an identity so intertwined with darkness that you begin to wonder if the act ever stopped. And I'll be honest with you, as this investigation unfolded, the discoveries didn't just shock the FBI. They sent ripples through the entire Osbourne family, Hollywood's elite circles, and even his most loyal fans. The reality was so unsettling that even those closest to him were forced to ask themselves, how much of Ozzy did we ever really know? Let me put it to you this way. If the journals, tapes, and artifacts discovered inside that mansion are true, then Ozzy wasn't just a performer dabbling in theatrics. He was a man haunted by the very demons he pretended to control. He was someone who lived not only in the spotlight, but in the shadows, navigating a double life that few would ever dare to acknowledge. And here's the kicker. This is only the beginning. Because while the relics and occult artifacts might fuel the headlines, it was the family secrets. The tapes, the journals, the revelations about affairs, betrayals, and elite connections that turned this investigation from a curiosity into an earthquake. So buckle up, because over the next chapters, we're going to walk room by room, chamber by chamber, and file by file through Ozzy Osbourne's mansion. We're going to piece together what the FBI really found and why it has left so many people stunned, confused, and disturbed. But before we dive into the heart of those discoveries, let's stop here, because the very first thing the agents uncovered wasn't just bizarre. It set the stage for everything that came after. And what they stumbled on, behind a simple locked door, would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What was waiting behind that locked door? A forgotten storage closet? Or the key to unraveling the mystery of Ozzy Osbourne's double life? That's the question the FBI agents faced as they stood in the dimly lit hallway of his sprawling mansion, their gloved hands hovering over bolt cutters, their eyes fixed on a door that didn't belong. At first glance, the door seemed ordinary. But isn't it always the ordinary things that hide the darkest secrets? Unlike the ornate woodwork of the rest of the house, this one was plain, unpolished, and scarred, as though someone wanted it to disappear into the background. No one could remember ever seeing it on tour videos or the countless family reality show episodes. And yet here it was, silent, waiting. The house itself was eerily quiet that day. The world outside buzzed with news of Ozzy's death, fans leaving flowers at the gates, reporters shouting questions into cameras. But inside, there was only silence broken by the creak of floorboards and the occasional echo of footsteps. You have to imagine that contrast. Outside, chaos. Inside, the stillness of a house that had seen more than its fair share of madness. Now let's pause and ask, what do you think the FBI expected to find in Ozzy Osbourne's home? Drugs? Maybe. Rare collectibles? Of course. But a door leading to a secret chamber? That wasn't in anyone's playbook. The first agent cut the lock. It didn't just snap, it groaned, as though it hadn't been touched in years. When the door swung open, the air that spilled out was heavy, stale, and oddly metallic. One of the agents later described it as the kind of air that makes you feel like you shouldn't be breathing it. But before we step inside that room with them, let's rewind just a few hours earlier to the very moment the FBI arrived at the mansion. Because this wasn't a routine check. They weren't just there to close the book on a rock legend. They were there because something about Ozzy's passing had raised red flags. The official line was clear, natural causes. But whispers quickly spread about the mansion itself. The property wasn't just big. It was labyrinthine, with decades of renovations, expansions, and eccentric adjustments made under Ozzy's erratic vision. Contractors had spoken of strange requests. Visitors had reported odd feelings in certain parts of the house. And Ozzy himself had been known to retreat into rooms where no one else was allowed. So when the FBI arrived, it wasn't just about securing evidence. It was about peeling back layers of mystery that had long been brushed off as Ozzy just being Ozzy. The first rooms were exactly what you'd expect. Platinum records, bizarre memorabilia, walls covered in photos from his chaotic career. A mix of pride and insanity. There were guitars worth millions, costumes that still smelled of smoke and sweat, even props from tours that fans would give anything to own. But then the mood shifted. As the agents moved deeper into the house, they started to notice inconsistencies. Doors that didn't line up with architectural blueprints. Hallways that led to dead ends. And that's when they stumbled on the locked door. Ask yourself this. If Ozzy had nothing to hide, why build a door that no one was supposed to find? The agents pushed inside, and what they found wasn't just unexpected, it was unnerving. The room was small, almost claustrophobic, with walls made of rough stone instead of polished wood. This wasn't part of the main mansion's design. It felt older, like it had been carved out or added with deliberate secrecy. At first, it looked empty. Just dust, cobwebs, and a faint smell of damp earth. But then, one agent noticed the floor. It wasn't level. A panel had been laid across it, a crude attempt to disguise what was underneath. When they lifted it, they found a staircase. Imagine that moment. You think you're done. You think you've opened a strange storage room at most, and suddenly you're staring down into a hidden passage. Your heart pounds. Your skin prickles. Do you go down? Of course they did. The stairs led into darkness, each step groaning under their weight. Their flashlights cut through thick dust, illuminating symbols etched into the walls. Some were crude drawings. Others were disturbingly precise, as if done with intent and knowledge. Pentagrams. Serpents. Faces twisted in agony. Now here's the contradiction that made the discovery even more bizarre. Ozzy had spent years brushing off accusations of Satanism, insisting his stage persona was nothing more than performance. He mocked critics who accused him of devil worship, claiming he was just giving the audience what they wanted. But in these hidden chambers, the evidence seemed to tell a very different story. Let's not jump ahead too fast, though. The deeper the FBI went, the more unsettling it became. The chamber wasn't just one room, it was a network. Narrow corridors led to small alcoves, each containing something stranger than the last. In one alcove, there were jars filled with substances too old to identify. In another, broken statues with their faces deliberately defaced. And hanging on the walls were cloaks, black, red, some with faded stains that raised far too many questions. Now stop and think. Do you believe Ozzy was actually performing rituals in this hidden place? Or could these have been props, collected by a man obsessed with maintaining his dark reputation? The agents had to ask the same question. But here's the problem. If it was all just theatrics, why was it hidden so deliberately? Why lock it away where no fan, no journalist, no family member could ever stumble across it? One agent later described it like this. It felt less like a shrine and more like a workshop, as though this was where the real Ozzy lived, and everything upstairs was just for show. Can you imagine how that felt to hear? But remember, the discoveries didn't end there. In fact, what came next would transform the investigation from strange to horrifying. Because as the agents pushed further, one of them noticed a door at the far end of the chamber. A door much older, much heavier than the one upstairs. It was sealed shut with iron bolts, as though someone had wanted it never to be opened again. And yet, that's exactly what the FBI was about to do. Because behind that ancient door lay the first undeniable evidence that Ozzy Osbourne's dark side wasn't just a stage act. It was something much, much darker. What was behind that heavy iron door at the far end of the chamber? That's the question that haunted the agents as their flashlights cut through the darkness, catching on flakes of rust that crumbled away with every touch. Imagine standing there, heart pounding, knowing that you were about to open something sealed for decades, maybe even longer. Would you hesitate, or would curiosity drive you to push forward no matter the risk? The FBI didn't hesitate. They unfastened the iron bolts one by one. Each metallic clang echoed down the narrow stone corridors, sounding more like a warning than a simple noise. It was as though the mansion itself wanted to keep what was hidden locked away. But once the final bolt fell, there was no turning back. The agents shoved the door open, and a wave of stale air, thick with dust and something metallic, rolled over them. What they saw beyond wasn't just another room. It was a world entirely separate from the mansion above. The chamber stretched out longer than any of them expected, almost like a subterranean hall carved directly into the earth. The walls were rough, uneven, and covered in markings, symbols that no casual observer could recognize. Some resembled ancient runes, while others were shapes so twisted and abstract that they looked more like the product of nightmares than human hands. And here's where things get chilling. These weren't random doodles. They were organized. They told a story, one that repeated itself along the walls. Serpents devouring their tails, suns eclipsed by shadows, faceless figures kneeling before horned silhouettes. Do you think that sounds theatrical? Like something a rock star might pay an artist to create for shock value? Maybe. But ask yourself, why was this place hidden so deep underground, sealed away as if to protect the world from it? The agents moved slowly, shining their lights across the walls, whispering to each other in hushed tones. One of them later admitted that it felt less like exploring a house and more like trespassing into a tomb. And then they saw it, the alcoves. Lining the walls were small chambers, each about the size of a walk-in closet. Inside them lay relics, bizarre, unsettling, and utterly unexplainable. One alcove held a collection of masks, grotesque in design, their features warped into eternal screams. Another contained fragments of bones, though whether they belonged to animals or something else was impossible to say. Jars filled with blackened liquid sat on crude shelves, their contents unidentifiable but rancid-smelling. But the most disturbing alcove held what appeared to be an altar, a slab of stone, discolored and cracked, with stains that no one wanted to test too closely. Draped over it was a faded cloth, embroidered with symbols that matched the ones carved into the walls. And resting on top of that altar, a dagger, its blade rusted, its hilt decorated with serpentine engravings, as though it had been forged for a very specific purpose. Let me ask you, do you believe these items were props, souvenirs collected by a man who built his image around darkness? Or do you think these were tools, used for purposes far more sinister than anyone ever suspected? The contradiction is what makes this discovery so haunting. On stage, Ozzy could laugh, sing, and make a spectacle out of darkness. But down here, in these hidden chambers, the artifacts didn't feel like theatrics. They felt purposeful. And the deeper the agents went, the stranger it became. One section of the chamber appeared to be a library, or at least, Ozzy's version of one. Shelves carved into the stone walls held books bound in cracked leather, their pages yellowed and brittle. Some were in languages no one could immediately recognize. Others were filled with diagrams of rituals, astrological charts, and incantations that hinted at something far older than rock and roll theatrics. Now here's the part that might surprise you. Ozzy himself had often joked about his fascination with Aleister Crowley, the infamous occultist. He even referenced him in songs. But buried here, underground, were texts directly tied to Crowley's teachings, alongside works even more obscure, some so rare that experts would later confirm only a handful of copies existed worldwide. So, was Ozzy simply a collector of rare and controversial books? Or was he studying something he never wanted the public, or even his family, to know about? The agents pressed on. Each step raised more questions than answers. At one point, they found a section of the chamber with items that looked eerily theatrical, stage props, costumes, and backdrops that might have easily been explained as tour memorabilia. And yet, mixed in with these items were relics too ancient, too fragile, and too authentic to dismiss as props. That's when one of the agents noticed the carvings on the floor. Unlike the chaotic scrawls on the walls, these markings were deliberate. Circles intersecting with geometric patterns, symbols arranged in precise order. It looked like a ritual space, a place designed for gatherings or ceremonies. The dust that covered the floor was disturbed in certain areas, as though this space had been used more recently than anyone wanted to admit. Imagine being one of those FBI agents. You're deep underground in a rock star's home, surrounded by symbols you don't understand, relics you can't explain, and markings that suggest you're standing in the middle of something sacred or profane. Would you start to wonder if the Prince of Darkness persona was less of a character and more of a confession? And just when they thought they had cataloged the strangest finds, they stumbled across something even more bizarre. At the far end of the chamber was a false wall. It looked solid at first glance, but closer inspection revealed seams, as though it had been constructed to hide something behind it. They chipped at the edges, pulled it apart piece by piece, and what lay beyond left even the most seasoned agent speechless. Behind that wall was a smaller chamber, and in that chamber sat a wooden chest, old and weathered, bound with heavy metal straps. The chest was locked, its surface covered in carvings of the same twisted symbols found throughout the underground hall. The agents didn't open it, not immediately. They photographed it, logged it, and prepared to transport it for secure examination. But the very existence of that chest raised a chilling possibility that everything they had seen so far, the artifacts, the altar, the books, was just the surface. that inside that chest lay the true heart of Ozzy Osbourne's darkest secrets. And here's where we pause. Because while the agents were still processing the enormity of what they'd found in the hidden chambers, they didn't yet realize that upstairs, in the mansion itself, there were more discoveries waiting. Discoveries that had nothing to do with occult symbols, and everything to do with family, betrayal, and Hollywood power. But first, the question lingered in the air, heavy and unsettling. Why would Ozzy Osbourne build hidden chambers beneath his home, fill them with relics, and then seal them away as if the world was never meant to see them? The answer to that question wouldn't just reshape the investigation. It would set the stage for the most shocking revelations yet. Because what came next wasn't about artifacts at all. It was about Ozzy himself, his own words, recorded and written, waiting to be uncovered. And when the FBI finally turned their attention to those journals and tapes, what they heard would make the relics seem almost tame in comparison. What exactly did the FBI find when they began to catalog the objects inside those hidden chambers? Were they harmless curiosities collected by a man obsessed with his Prince of Darkness image? Or were they tangible evidence of something much darker, something Ozzy Osbourne never intended the world to see? That's the haunting question investigators had to wrestle with as they unpacked box after box, shelf after shelf, alcove after alcove of relics. And let me tell you, these weren't just oddities. These were items that, when laid out, looked less like collectibles and more like the inventory of a ritualistic temple. Picture this, an FBI evidence table filling with daggers, chalices, and masks. Each object seemed charged with a story, and together they painted a chilling portrait of a man who blurred the line between performance art and genuine obsession. The first set of objects cataloged were weapons. Ritual daggers, some rusted, some preserved, others gleaming as though recently sharpened. Their hilts bore engravings, serpents swallowing their tails, inverted crosses, suns eclipsed by shadows. And these weren't cheap stage props from a Halloween store. Experts later confirmed that several were antiques, forged centuries ago, used in practices long outlawed in Europe. Now ask yourself, why would a rock star, who had the money to buy anything in the world, choose to collect weapons tied to blood rituals? And then came the chalices. Golden cups, some tarnished, others encrusted with jewels, all stained with a residue that investigators carefully preserved for testing. The unsettling part? These weren't trophies from concerts or movie sets. They looked ceremonial. They looked used. It didn't stop there. The FBI also uncovered masks, grotesque, distorted visages that seemed designed to terrify. Some were animalistic, carved with snarling teeth and horns. Others were human but warped, with expressions of agony or madness. A few were painted black and red, colors traditionally linked to ritual symbolism. Here's the contradiction. Ozzy had always laughed off accusations of devil worship, saying he was a showman, not a sorcerer. Yet in these chambers, the sheer number and authenticity of these objects begged a new question. Was he simply collecting these items as props, or was he preserving tools that had been genuinely used in ceremonies? Let's not forget the books. Dozens of them, lined up along shelves carved directly into the stone. Thick tomes bound in leather, their spines cracked from age. Some were identifiable, grimoires linked to known occult traditions. Others were written in strange languages, impossible to decipher without specialized knowledge. One book in particular stood out, a massive black volume, its cover embossed with a serpent coiled around a skull. Inside, pages were filled with diagrams of rituals, some involving circles, others involving blood. It was here that agents found notations in the margins, handwritten, modern, and shockingly familiar. The handwriting matched Ozzy's. Now, pause for a moment. Imagine being the agent flipping through those pages and realizing that Ozzy himself had been studying, annotating, and perhaps even experimenting with these rituals. How do you separate the man from the myth at that point? But here's where the discovery went from bizarre to truly disturbing. Among the artifacts were statues. Small figurines, no taller than a foot, carved from stone, wood, and bone. Each represented figures of power, horned beings, winged entities, faceless gods. Some were chipped and broken, as if used in ceremonies. Others were pristine, preserved with a reverence that suggested importance. And scattered throughout were objects that defied easy explanation. jars of unidentified substances, some liquid, some powder, bones, too small to be human, but too ambiguous to dismiss outright. A set of robes folded neatly, black fabric embroidered with red stitching that formed intricate symbols, and an incense burner shaped like a skull, its interior still coated with ash. Can you imagine the atmosphere in that chamber? Even hardened investigators reported feeling uneasy, as though the very walls held on to the energy of whatever had taken place there. But perhaps the most unsettling item wasn't ancient at all. It was modern. In one alcove, tucked away almost carelessly, they found a record player. Next to it sat a stack of vinyl records, not the commercial releases fans knew, but unlabeled discs in plain sleeves. When investigators played one later, it wasn't music that filled the room. It was chanting, low, rhythmic, and haunting, voices layered together, rising and falling in a cadence that felt rehearsed, ritualistic. And among those voices was one that agents swore sounded unmistakably like Ozzy himself. Now here's the ultimate contradiction. Was this another recording meant to shock? A hidden art project? Or was this proof that Ozzy wasn't just performing rituals on stage? He was conducting them in secret? The discovery of those recordings forced everyone to rethink what these artifacts really represented. They weren't random. They weren't scattered. They were intentional. And yet, even as investigators tried to piece together what these objects meant, one thing became clear. The chamber wasn't just about artifacts. It was about purpose. Every item seemed to serve a role, to contribute to something larger than the sum of its parts. But here's the twist you didn't see coming. Among the piles of objects, tucked between two statues, was something that stopped the agents cold, a small black notebook. Unlike the ancient tomes, this one was recent. The cover was cracked but modern, the pages lined. And inside were handwritten entries, doodles, sketches, and notes. But they weren't just random scribbles. They were confessions, drawings of ritual circles, sketches of masks, notes about the balance of light and dark. And on several pages, words that read like half lyrics, half prayers. Darkness is truth. The stage is a mirror. The mask becomes the man. If that doesn't chill you, I don't know what will. Because that notebook suggested something far more terrifying than a hidden collection. It suggested a mindset, a belief system. Ozzy wasn't just surrounded by these artifacts. He was living them, thinking about them, writing about them in his private notes. So here's the question for you. Was this Ozzy's true self, revealed only in death? Or was this simply the ultimate performance? One so convincing that even after his passing, people still can't tell where the act ended and the man began? Either way, the effect was the same. Investigators weren't just cataloging objects anymore. They were piecing together a hidden life. And just when they thought they'd reached the limits of shock, the notebook delivered one final twist. At the very back, tucked into a pocket, was a key. Small, brass, and unmarked. The agents had no idea what it opened. But they were about to find out. Because upstairs, in a locked drawer of Ozzy's private study, that key would uncover the next chapter of this story, a set of journals and tapes that exposed truths no one was prepared to hear. But what was written in those journals, and what was recorded on those tapes, would make the occult artifacts look almost tame. What could possibly be inside a book that Ozzy Osbourne never meant anyone to see? That's the question agents asked themselves as they turned the small brass key they had found hidden in that black notebook. Upstairs, in Ozzy's private study, behind a heavy oak desk that still smelled faintly of tobacco and whiskey, they discovered a locked drawer. The key slid in perfectly, and with a soft click, the drawer creaked open. Inside, wrapped in a black cloth, lay a book. Larger than any personal journal you'd expect, heavier than any stage prop, its very presence seemed to radiate importance. The cover was jet black, embossed with faint symbols that caught the light when tilted, circles intersecting, serpents intertwined, a horned figure lurking at the edges. It wasn't labeled, but its weight alone told investigators this was no ordinary diary. This was the Black Book. Now imagine holding that book in your hands. Do you open it? Do you risk peering into the private thoughts of a man who spent decades blurring the line between myth and reality? Or do you set it aside, fearful of what truths might be scrawled inside? The FBI didn't hesitate. They opened it, and the first page set the tone immediately. Written in Ozzy's unmistakable handwriting were the words, The mask is heavy. Sometimes it slips. Think about that for a moment. The mask. Was Ozzy confessing that his entire life, his persona, his madness, his chaos, was just a mask? Or was he admitting that behind the act was something even darker, something he struggled to contain? The entries that followed only deepened the mystery. Some were almost poetic. Light blinds the truth. Darkness whispers when no one listens. Others were disturbingly precise, detailing rituals, symbols, and processes that aligned eerily with the artifacts found in the hidden chambers. One page described the preparation of a circle of balance, complete with sketches of symbols and notes on the alignment of stars. Another spoke of offerings, though Ozzy never specified what kind. And then came the confessions. Pages where the tone shifted from detached fascination to raw, emotional honesty. He wrote about feeling trapped, about a life spiraling between two identities: the public Ozzy, the performer, the clown, the prince of darkness who entertained millions, and the private Ozzy, who seemed haunted by shadows he couldn't escape. Sometimes I don't know if I'm playing the devil, one entry read, or if the devil's playing me. That's not just chilling, it's heartbreaking. Because in those words, you see the fracture of a man torn between the myth he created and the darkness that consumed him. Now let's stop for a second. How much of this do you think was genuine belief, and how much was just the ramblings of a man lost in fame, addiction, and theatrics? Do you think Ozzy really believed he was flirting with something supernatural, or was he simply writing out his madness in the only way he knew how? The Black Book blurred that line beyond recognition. But it wasn't all metaphors and rituals. Interspersed among the strange passages were names. Names of people he trusted, people he feared, and people he seemed to loathe. Sharon's name appeared often, sometimes surrounded by words of love, other times framed by accusations of betrayal. The names of his children were there too, scribbled in frantic handwriting, sometimes accompanied by prayers, other times by warnings. And then there were the names of people outside the family, celebrities, executives, even politicians. Some entries hinted at secret meetings, late-night conversations, and whispered promises. At least one page referred to the circle, described not as a drawing on the floor, but as a group of powerful figures bound by secrets. Was Ozzy hinting at a hidden elite society? Or was this paranoia, amplified by years of excess? That's the kind of contradiction the FBI struggled to make sense of. But here's where the book became undeniably disturbing. About halfway through, the entries shifted into something else entirely: transcripts. Conversations written out as though Ozzy had recorded them and then copied them down. In one, he argued with Sharon about keeping the chambers locked. In another, he spoke to an unnamed figure about protecting the legacy, no matter what it takes. Even more unsettling were the taped confessions referenced in the book. Pages that read like reminders to himself. Tape 7, the ritual. Tape 11, the betrayal. Tape 19, the warning. Each one corresponded to a cassette later found in a hidden cabinet. Now imagine being an investigator and realizing this wasn't just a journal. It was an index, a map, guiding you toward even darker revelations. But the single most shocking page came near the end. Written in jagged, hurried handwriting, it said, "If they open the safe, they'll know the truth. If they hear the tapes, the family falls apart. If they read this, then I failed to keep the mask in place." And underneath, a final scrawl: "Darkness wins. Tell me, does that sound like a man joking around? Or does that sound like someone trapped in his own mythology, confessing the very secrets he had spent a lifetime hiding?" For the FBI, the Black Book was the smoking gun, not because it proved beyond a doubt that Ozzy was conducting rituals, but because it revealed a mind consumed by them. Whether theatrical, obsessive, or genuine, the level of detail and secrecy pointed to a man who lived his life not only in the spotlight, but in the shadows of something much darker. And just when they thought they had uncovered everything, tucked into the back of the book was a folded piece of paper. Old, fragile, stained with something dark. On it was a crude map of the mansion. Marked in red ink was a room that didn't exist on any blueprint. A room the FBI hadn't found yet. And when they followed that map, they discovered not just more artifacts, but the first of the tapes referenced in the Black Book. But what was on those tapes would shake even the most hardened agents to their core. What do you hear when you press play on a tape that was never meant to leave the shadows. Static? Silence? Or the voice of a man confessing the darkest secrets of his life? That's exactly what the FBI agents faced when they uncovered the first set of cassettes referenced in Ozzy Osbourne's Black Book. The tapes were found in a hidden cabinet, carefully sealed away behind a false wall in the very study where the journal was discovered. Dust clung to them, but the labels were shockingly clear, scrawled in Ozzy's unmistakable handwriting. Tape 7, The Ritual. Tape 11, The Betrayal. Tape 19, The Warning. Imagine being the one holding those tapes, knowing you were about to hear the raw, unfiltered voice of a man who lived and died in contradictions. Was this going to be performance art, drunken ramblings, or evidence of something no one was ever supposed to know? The first tape clicked into the player, and after a hiss of static, Ozzy's voice filled the room. It wasn't the voice fans knew from interviews or television. This wasn't the slurred, often incoherent Ozzy of the Osbournes, nor the booming frontman of Black Sabbath. This voice was steady, low, and deliberate, a side of him almost no one had ever heard. "I don't know why I'm doing this," the tape began. "Maybe so someone remembers when I'm gone. Maybe so I don't lose myself in the mask." Let that sink in. Ozzy, the man who made a career out of blurring reality and performance, confessing to a tape recorder that even he wasn't sure where the act ended and his true self began. As the tape played on, the content grew darker. He described rituals held in the underground chamber, the very one the FBI had already discovered. He spoke of symbols on the floor, candles burning into the night, and chants that were older than any song. Now, ask yourself, was this Ozzy documenting a performance, a twisted piece of method acting? Or was this his confession that he had walked deeper into the darkness than anyone ever believed? The tape ended abruptly, but the agents had barely processed what they'd heard before they loaded the next one. Tape 11, The Betrayal. This one was different. It wasn't just Ozzy speaking. It was a conversation. The voices were faint at first, but then sharpened. Ozzy and Sharon. The argument that unfolded was raw, vicious, and filled with accusations that no one outside that room was ever meant to hear. "You can't keep hiding this," Sharon's voice hissed. "If they find it, if anyone finds it, it'll destroy us. I built this." Ozzy snapped back. "It's who I am. Without it, I'm nothing. You knew what you were signing up for. You're dragging us all down with you," Sharon spat. And then came the line that made even the hardened FBI agents shift uncomfortably in their seats. Sharon whispered, "The chamber should have been sealed forever. You were never supposed to go back." Think about that. It wasn't shock in her voice. It wasn't disbelief. It was familiarity. Sharon wasn't questioning what the chambers were. She already knew. She was accusing him of reopening wounds that should have stayed buried. Now tell me, does that sound like a family completely blindsided by the discoveries, or a family complicit in secrets the world was never supposed to hear? The third tape, tape 19, The Warning, was the most disturbing of all. This time, Ozzy's voice was frantic, almost desperate. He spoke of a circle, not just the one on the floor, the real one, the circle of power. He referenced names, some too garbled to identify, others chillingly clear: producers, executives, a handful of Hollywood figures who had been close to the Osbournes for years. He claimed there were agreements, exchanges, and rituals that tied them together. And then came the line that froze the room. "They'll come for this," Ozzy muttered. "They'll come for the tapes, the book, the chamber. If they hear it, if they know what we did, it won't just be me who burns. It'll be all of us." Do you see the contradiction here? The man laughed off Satanism as theatrics for decades. Yet here he was, on tape, speaking in a tone of deadly seriousness about rituals, circles of power, and the destruction of his family if the truth ever got out. Now here's the twist. Among the tapes was one that wasn't labeled with a number at all. It simply had a single word scrawled on it: confession. The agents played it, and for a few minutes, it was nothing but silence. Then, suddenly, Ozzy's voice cracked through. "I did things I told myself were for the show. But some nights, I don't know anymore. I see their faces. I hear the voices. And I wonder, was it ever just a performance?" There was a long pause, a sound like Ozzy taking a deep breath, and then the final words. "If you're listening to this, then the mask is gone, and you'll know the truth about me, about us, about everything." The tape clicked off. Now ask yourself, what truth was he talking about? Was he confessing to crimes, to rituals, to betrayals? Or was this the final act of a man who lived his life performing, even for himself? For the FBI, the tapes turned a strange investigation into something much larger. Because these weren't just ramblings of a fading rock star. They were detailed, intentional recordings that tied directly to the artifacts, the Black Book, and the hidden chambers. And yet, the tapes were only part of the story. Because tucked beside them, stacked neatly in the drawer, were private journals, pages upon pages where Ozzy had written the thoughts he couldn't bring himself to speak out loud. And when those journals were opened, they exposed not just secrets about rituals, but shocking truths about his marriage, his children, and the Hollywood elite. Secrets that would rip apart the image of the Osbourne family forever. But what those journals revealed wasn't just betrayal. It was something far worse. Because among the confessions was a truth so explosive, so damaging, that it threatened to shatter not only his family, but the reputations of some of the most powerful people in Hollywood. And that was the discovery that turned whispers of scandal into an earthquake. What could be more shocking than occult relics hidden beneath a rock star's mansion? What could shake investigators more than tapes of chants, confessions, and warnings? The answer came when the FBI cracked open the stack of private journals lying beside those tapes. Pages that bared Ozzy Osbourne's soul in ways no one, not even his family, was prepared for. And here's the twist. While the artifacts painted a picture of rituals and darkness, the journals revealed something even more unsettling. Explosive family secrets that made the occult items look almost tame. Let's start with the first journal, bound in plain brown leather. The handwriting inside was unmistakably Ozzy's, jagged, messy, chaotic, much like the man himself. But these weren't random scribbles. These were thoughts, confessions, and accusations that seemed to have been locked away for decades. The first entry read, "Sharon built the empire, but I built the myth. Without me, there is no Osbourne legacy. Without her, I would have burned out years ago. We're trapped together, and sometimes I think that's the worst curse of all." Right away, you feel the tension. This wasn't the loving partnership portrayed on reality TV. This was a marriage that carried secrets sharp enough to cut through the facade of their empire. And it didn't take long before the entries grew darker. Ozzy wrote about betrayal, not just financial, not just emotional, but intimate. He accused Sharon of orchestrating things behind the scenes, of controlling the narrative of his life in ways the public never saw. At one point, he wrote, "The chambers aren't just mine. She knows more than she admits. She's kept the mask in place better than I ever could." Stop and think about that. Was Ozzy admitting that Sharon wasn't just his manager and wife, but his co-conspirator in hiding a darker reality? Or was this the paranoia of a man unraveling under the weight of fame and secrecy? Then came the most explosive revelation. A separate journal, its cover blackened and worn, contained pages filled with details about affairs, names, dates, places. Ozzy documented encounters with women throughout his career, some fleeting, others long-lasting. But what made these entries so damning wasn't just the infidelity, it was the names attached. Women tied not only to Hollywood, but to other powerful figures. Actresses, socialites, even the partners of other musicians. Ozzy wrote of guilt, but also of a sense of inevitability. "I destroy what I love," he scribbled in one passage. "Every night I go on stage, I sell them a lie. Every morning I wake up, I sell myself another." Can you imagine how his family must have felt reading those words? To the public, they were messy but united, a chaotic yet strangely lovable family. But behind closed doors, the reality was betrayal, distrust, and secrets that festered for years. And then there were the entries about his children. Ozzy wrote about Jack, Kelly, and Amy with a mixture of pride and sorrow. He praised their resilience, but also confessed that they had suffered because of him. "The house ate them alive," one entry read. "They'll never escape the shadows of these walls. I gave them fame, but I stole their childhoods." What makes this so tragic is that it wasn't written as a defense. It was written as a confession, an acknowledgement that his family paid the price for his fame and his demons. But perhaps the most shocking part of the journals wasn't about his marriage or his affairs. It was about Hollywood itself. Several entries described gatherings he attended, private parties filled with the elite, actors, producers, executives, where things happened that the public never saw. Ozzy described these events in chilling detail. The masks come off, and yet everyone is wearing one. Deals are made in whispers, promises sealed in shadows. We laugh like kings, but it feels like we're dancing on the edge of fire. Do you think he was exaggerating, painting dramatic pictures the way he always had? Or was he documenting a side of Hollywood most people suspect, but rarely see confirmed? The contradictions kept piling up. One page would read like the diary of a guilty husband. The next would sound like the ramblings of a prophet, warning of forces larger than himself. And yet, through it all, one thread remained constant. The sense that Ozzy was burdened by secrets too heavy to carry alone. And here's where it gets truly unsettling. One entry referenced the tapes directly. If the children ever hear tape 19, they'll never forgive me. If Sharon hears tape 11 again, she'll never forgive herself. That's not paranoia. That's a man documenting the exact reasons why these recordings were hidden, why the black book was locked away, why the mansion was filled with secrets. The FBI wasn't just uncovering evidence of rituals. They were uncovering the blueprint of a family empire built on lies, betrayals, and carefully managed images. And yet, the deeper they dug, the more they realized this wasn't just about Ozzy's family. Because tucked into the back of one journal was a letter, unsent and signed, but unmistakably written in Ozzy's hand. It was addressed to a powerful Hollywood executive, and it referenced the circle once again. "You promised we'd all be protected," the letter read. "But I see the cracks forming. I see the betrayals. When the mask slips, we all fall together." Imagine reading that and realizing this wasn't just about a rock star spiraling out of control. This was about a network of secrets that extended far beyond one family. And just when investigators thought they'd reached the peak of revelations, they stumbled on something even more shocking. A journal entry marked with a single word at the top, "Final." In it, Ozzy confessed that he feared his secrets would come out after his death. He wrote, "The house will betray me. The chambers will speak. The book will scream. And when they do, they won't just know about me. They'll know about all of us." Now stop and think. Was Ozzy paranoid, convinced his life was part of some greater conspiracy? Or was he leaving behind a warning, a confession that others desperately wanted buried with him? For the FBI, this was the tipping point. The artifacts had been strange, the tapes disturbing, but the journals made everything personal. They weren't dealing with the caricature of Ozzy Osbourne anymore. They were staring into the fractured mind of a man who lived and died in secrets. But here's the chilling part. The journals didn't just expose affairs, betrayals, and secret gatherings. They hinted at something far worse, something the FBI couldn't ignore. Because the final pages suggested that Ozzy wasn't just documenting the darkness. He was preparing for it to be exposed. And the next discovery, tied to Hollywood's elite, would prove that this story wasn't just about one man's demons. It was about an entire system built on secrets too dangerous to ever see the light of day. What happens when the private words of a rock legend collide with the power structures of Hollywood? What happens when letters, never intended to be mailed, reveal conversations, deals, and secrets that link a single man's dark obsessions to the highest levels of the entertainment world? That's exactly what the FBI uncovered next. Letters Ozzy Osbourne had written to Hollywood power players. And these weren't fan notes or friendly exchanges. These were explosive documents that hinted at a hidden network of influence, betrayal, and fear. The letters were tucked into a locked drawer in Ozzy's study, folded and sealed but never posted. Some were dated decades earlier, others more recent, but all carried a tone of urgency, almost desperation. The handwriting was shaky in places, bold in others, as though written in fits of mania and clarity. And while not every name was revealed publicly, the initials, the coded references, and the sheer weight of the content left little doubt. These letters weren't just personal, they were dangerous. One of the earliest letters was addressed to a famous producer, identified only by initials. Ozzy's words were blunt. "You promised the circle would protect me. You promised the tapes would never surface. Yet here I am, drowning in shadows while you sit in light. If I fall, you fall. Don't forget that." Stop and think about that for a moment. What circle was he talking about? Was this paranoia? Or was it a coded reference to an inner group of Hollywood elites who operated behind closed doors, bound not by contracts, but by secrets? Another letter, written years later, read like a plea. The weight is too much. They laugh at me on stage, they call me mad, but I've kept the mask for all of you. I've carried the darkness so you didn't have to. When the mask slips, when they see the chambers, they'll know it wasn't just me. Protect the family. Protect the legacy, or everything burns. These words raise a chilling question. Was Ozzy protecting himself, or was he protecting others? People far more powerful than him. People who had a lot more to lose if the truth ever came out. The FBI also discovered letters that seemed to target specific figures in entertainment. Some praised them for loyalty, others accused them of betrayal. You smile in public, but I know what you whisper in private. One letter raged. You think you can cut me out, leave me in the dark, but I am the darkness. I'll drag you down with me. It wasn't just anger. It was leverage. These letters suggested that Ozzy knew things that could destroy reputations and topple careers. Was this his way of keeping himself safe, by ensuring he was too dangerous to cross? One of the most disturbing letters wasn't directed to a person at all. It was written almost like a manifesto, a rant against the system that had elevated him to fame and then left him feeling like a pawn. Hollywood eats its own, he wrote. We dance in masks, we smile for cameras, but in the back rooms, in the midnight hours, we sell pieces of ourselves until there's nothing left. They took mine. They'll take yours too. Now, let me ask you, does that sound like the words of a paranoid addict lashing out? Or does it sound like someone who had seen the true cost of fame and wanted to leave a record before it consumed him entirely? The contradictions only deepened with every letter. Some were affectionate, written to friends and colleagues, thanking them for keeping the circle strong. Others were venomous, threatening to let the world see what happens in the shadows. A few even contained references to specific events, parties, meetings, contracts, that could be cross-checked with real timelines. And then came the letter that shocked investigators the most. It was short, only a few sentences, but it cut deeper than any of the others. To the one who betrayed me, you know what you did. You know the cost. When they find the tapes, your name will be there. You'll wish you had stayed in the dark with me. There was no signature, no recipient identified. Just that chilling warning. What betrayal was he referring to? Was it personal, someone close to him, maybe even in his family? Or was it professional, an executive, a peer, someone in the entertainment industry who had crossed a line? The ambiguity made it even more terrifying, because it left the possibility open that multiple betrayals had occurred, that multiple people were implicated in whatever secrets Ozzy carried with him to the grave. And here's the contradiction that makes this discovery so fascinating. On stage, Ozzy was the clown, the chaos incarnate, the man people mocked as incoherent and out of control. But in these letters, he was sharp, focused, and deliberate. He wasn't rambling. He was accusing. He was warning. The FBI realized something critical at this point. These weren't just the words of a fading rock star. These were potential weapons, blackmail material, confessions, or maybe even insurance policies that Ozzy had crafted to ensure his silence was never forced. But the biggest revelation came not from the letters themselves, but from what they led to. Because tucked in with the letters was a small envelope marked only with the words, "For Sharon." Inside was a note unlike any of the others. You kept me alive longer than I deserved. You kept the mask in place. But you know as well as I do, if the safe is opened, the truth will come out. Protect the children. Protect the circle. Don't let them know. Can you imagine the weight of those words? Sharon, the woman who stood by him for decades, accused of complicity in earlier entries, was now being begged to keep the secrets buried forever. But here's the question. What secrets were so dangerous that even in death, Ozzy feared their exposure more than anything else? The FBI believed they had part of the answer. Because as they cross-referenced the letters with the tapes and journals, a picture began to emerge. A picture of a man entangled in more than just music and fame. A man tied to powerful figures in Hollywood, bound by secrets that were never supposed to leave his mansion. And just when the agents thought they had uncovered the darkest layer, another discovery shook them even more. Because in a separate compartment of the drawer, hidden beneath the letters, they found files, not about Hollywood elites, but about his own family. Files that contained names, notes, and warnings directed at his children. And what those files revealed would change everything the FBI thought they knew about the Osbournes. What if the person the world thought of as the glue that held Ozzy Osbourne's life together was, in fact, far more entangled in his secrets than anyone ever realized? What if Sharon Osbourne, the manager, the wife, the survivor, wasn't just the long-suffering partner of the Prince of Darkness, but someone who knew far more about the hidden chambers, the tapes, and the letters than she ever let on? That's the chilling possibility the FBI had to confront when they opened the files hidden beneath Ozzy's private letters. Inside the drawer, beneath those folded notes to Hollywood elites, was a folder labeled simply S. The contents were devastating. The first page wasn't even written by Ozzy. It was a typed note, and signed, with no letterhead, but its words were sharp and commanding. Keep the mask in place. Do not let him slip. The family depends on it. The circle depends on it. Attached to it were pages in Ozzy's handwriting, notes that referred directly to Sharon, sometimes with love, sometimes with bitterness, but always with the clear suggestion that she was involved in more than just managing his career. She knows about the chambers. One entry read, "She was the one who told me to seal them the first time. Said it was safer for everyone if they were never opened again. But I can't stay away. The dark calls me back." Stop and think about that. Sharon wasn't just aware of the hidden rooms. According to Ozzy's own writing, she was the one who urged him to keep them closed. But here's the contradiction. If Sharon knew about them, why were they filled with fresh artifacts, newer notes, and updated journals? Did she lose control over Ozzy's obsession? Or did she secretly allow him to indulge it, knowing that it would never see the light of day? The FBI files raised another disturbing question. In one section of the folder were receipts, financial records tied to renovations on the mansion. Contractors had been hired to work on structural repairs and foundation adjustments. But interviews later revealed that some of these contractors had never been allowed to see the full scope of their work. One even claimed, "We built a wall where no wall should be, sealed a space that didn't exist on the blueprint." Mrs. Osbourne paid in cash, said it was confidential. So let me ask you, does that sound like a wife completely in the dark? Or does it sound like someone who was actively maintaining the secrecy of her husband's hidden chambers? And then came the letters addressed specifically to Sharon. One, written in Ozzy's handwriting but never sent, began with a chilling line. "You wear the mask better than I do." He went on to describe how Sharon had orchestrated media appearances, scripted interviews, and even reality television moments to reinforce the public image of their family while keeping the private truth buried. "You tell them I'm mad, that I mumble, that I don't know what I'm saying," he wrote. "But you know every word is true. You hide it better than I can." This wasn't a love letter. This was an accusation wrapped in reluctant admiration. But perhaps the most damning piece wasn't a letter at all. It was a tape. The cassette, labeled Tape 11 in the Black Book Index, had already been partially reviewed by investigators. But inside the Sharon folder was a transcript Ozzy himself had written, as though he knew someday the recording might be lost. The transcript detailed a fight between him and Sharon, one already hinted at in the tapes. In it, Sharon begged him to stop returning to the chambers, to stop feeding the circle. Ozzy accused her of hypocrisy. "You tell me to stop," the transcript read, "but you were there the first time. You wore the mask too. You can't erase that." Now imagine that revelation. The world saw Sharon as the manager who saved Ozzy's career, the strong woman who pulled him out of addiction time and again. But here was evidence suggesting she may have been more involved in his darkness than anyone could have imagined. Was she complicit? Or was she trapped, forced into silence by the same circle that haunted Ozzy? The contradictions are what make this discovery so fascinating. On one hand, Sharon appeared to be the practical one, always pulling Ozzy back from the edge. On the other hand, the documents and transcripts suggested she had crossed that edge with him at least once, maybe more. And here's where the story takes an even darker turn. One of the journals found in the study contained a passage written during the early years of the Osbournes' reality show. She said the cameras were the perfect mask, Ozzy wrote. "They'll never believe the truth if they see us fighting about laundry and dogs. She's smarter than me. She knows how to keep the circle safe." Think about that. Was their hit reality show, a program that made the Osbourne family household names around the world, not just entertainment, but a carefully constructed smokescreen to hide the real story? The FBI agents were forced to consider it. And then came the most explosive revelation of all. Buried at the bottom of the folder was a note written by Sharon herself. handwritten, folded, and tucked away among Ozzy's files. It wasn't dated, but its meaning was undeniable. I did what I had to do to protect the children. You don't know what they would have done if we let it slip. Better the world thinks you're mad than they know the truth. Better they laugh at us than burn us alive. Read that again. Better the world thinks you're mad than they know the truth. What truth was Sharon referring to? What was so dangerous that she would rather sacrifice her husband's dignity, his reputation, and their family's public image than risk exposure?